is still relatively unstable at the moment, and so the air is rising. It's going to produce some cloud through the morning and early part of the afternoon. So after that bright start, actually the cloud tending to build up and fill in, and a few showers developing, particularly through central southern England, the Midlands, northern England, and further showers to come for northern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. Away from any showers, actually, there will be some bright spells, and it will feel warm with light winds, 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18, 19, perhaps 20 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England. Into the evening, and the cloud tends to thicken further across central parts of the country, and further showers will develop. North Midlands into northern England as well as North Wales. They'll move north, and then either side of that, some clear spells. But actually, for many, it's a cloudier night, and as a result, it is a slightly milder night. Temperatures 15 to 16 Celsius in the south first thing, 12 to 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We start off with the early cloud across northern England and North Wales, drifting into southern Scotland, and then further showers will develop across central Scotland, particularly over the Grampians, for example. Also, by the end of the afternoon, some showers start to emerge for West Wales and the southwest. But for many, it's a bright day away from the showers, even a sunny day in the southeast. And the southeast sees predominantly sunny conditions through Friday and Saturday, increasingly warm as well, whilst the rest of the country sees cloud and some showers.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:31 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, fresh from that debate last night, or should I say half a debate, we'll digest what we heard from those candidates, from supporters of those candidates, and indeed opinion pollster. Also, the NHS, is it on its knees? We'll speak to a former health secretary about that. All to come and more after the headlines.
A very good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Now, commuters are facing travel disruption across the country today as rail workers go on strike again. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators have walked out in a long-running dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Picket lines have been formed outside stations across the country as union members from Network Rail and 14 train operators strike. Network Rail says only 20% of services are running. Some places will have no trains at all. England are through to the Women's Euro 2022 final after beating Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane. It was Beth Mead, Lucy Bronze, Alessia Russo and Fran Kirby who all scored, ending a 13-year run of defeats in the final four of major tournaments for the team. The Lionesses will now face either France or Germany in the final on Sunday at Wembley. The second head-to-head leadership debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss came to an abrupt end last night after the host collapsed. Kate McCann fainted whilst live on air, forcing Talk TV to cut away from the studio. The broadcaster says she's fine, but the rest of the debate was cancelled. Before the incident, the candidates had clashed over tax, with Ms Truss criticising Rishi Sunak of hitting the public by raising national insurance. The flight jacket worn by American astronaut Buzz Aldrin on his historic moon mission has sold at auction for over £2 million. The jacket, which was used during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission, is now the most valuable American space artefact ever auctioned. It displays Aldrin's name tag above the mission emblem and the American flag on the left shoulder. The jacket was purchased by an anonymous bidder. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's head back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, straight into it. Last night I was in that spin room for the fourth televised debate, the second head-to-head of this contest. Yet the Sunak-Truss ding-dong was, of course, cut short by half an hour after presenter Kate McCann collapsed on stage. Let's replay what viewers saw at that moment.
Going to challenge the freedom and democracy.
Really concerning there. A loud crash followed by a demonstrably concerned Liz Truss exiting the frame, rushing towards the noise. Initially, we didn't know what had happened. The spin room fell silent as teams communicated with the studio. The debate, of course, did not come back on air, and campaign teams decided it would be inappropriate to deliver the usual post-match analysis that we were expecting. But before it ended, of course, those two candidates clashed on issues over the NHS, the energy crisis and, indeed, tax, with Truss accusing the former Chancellor Sunak of being morally wrong over his hikes to national insurance and corporation tax. And, of course, Mr Sunak, after that debate, coming forth with new policy, potentially tax cuts of his own, at least temporarily, to VAT on energy bills. Well, let's explore what the public might have made of it all now with Chris Curtis, the head of political polling at Opinium, who joins us live from Westminster. And Chris, first of all, what do you expect viewers might have made of the rather abrupt ending to that debate last night, and particularly how Liz Truss, someone who's been accused of perhaps being robotic in the past, how she responded to that incident?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually, and obviously that's the clip that lots of people will be watching today, rather than necessarily the content of the rest of the debate. And I do think it probably was you don't want to talk about, the political impacts of these things, but it certainly was a humanising moment for her. She has had a bit of a reputation for not quite being the kind of performer. She often looks, as you say, a little bit robotic, and this was a moment in which she seemed very human, and she did sort of respond in a way that I think many people would be able to relate to. So, given that that's the clip that's being widely played today, I imagine it probably was a good moment for her.
Well, let's explore some of the polling that has taken place. Of course, there wasn't any polling after the debate last night, but after Monday night, we did see some. First of all, your company, Opinium, gave us this analysis that amongst Conservative voters, Liz Truss won, but amongst people who voted for the Labour Party in 2019, Rishi Sunak was ahead. Liz Truss ahead there by 9 points amongst Conservative voters. There were also these polls from YouGov, another polling firm, of course, which showed that amongst Conservative members, Liz Truss carried 50%, whereas Rishi Sunak only carried 39%, a considerable lead there for Liz Truss amongst Conservative members, according to YouGov. Chris Curtis, those two different polling companies there corroborating that result, one looking at Conservative voters, the other looking at Conservative members. Liz Truss seems ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't, Rishi Sunak needed some movement here. Pretty much all of the polls for the past few weeks have shown that Liz Truss is comfortably in the lead among Conservative Party members. Rishi Sunak needed to appeal to Conservative Party members ideologically, but more importantly, to show he was the kind of person who would best appeal to the public, best win a general election. He didn't do that in Monday night's debate. And to be honest with you, I think he's running out of opportunities to close that gap with Liz Truss, to make the argument that he would be the better leader of the Conservative Party. And at this stage, I now think the overwhelming likelihood is that Liz Truss ends up being Prime Minister this September.
That's a pretty extraordinary claim, because, of course, there is a long time in this leadership contest to go. We've got over a month more of debates, of hustings, and indeed of voting. What makes you say that it's unlikely now that Rishi Sunak can turn it around?
Well, there's a few. Firstly, overwhelming likelihood. I will make the slight caveat that there's obviously still a chance and there is no certainty in these things. But the reason I think at this stage there is an overwhelming likelihood, firstly, obviously, Liz Truss holds that comfortable lead among Conservative Party members. Secondly, one of the reasons that Rishi Sunak is struggling is because of trust. A lot more people say they trust Liz Truss than say they trust Rishi Sunak. Trust is one of those things that's hard to gain back once you've lost it. Polling has shown that pretty consistently. Thirdly, I think today's going to be a rough day for him. He has U-turned, or is perceived, the way that the narrative is being spun at least, is that he's U-turned on what was one of his biggest dividing lines with Liz Truss, which I really just do not think is going to help him and his campaign. And I just think that, yes, you're right, of course, there's many weeks left to go before we end up getting the result. But ballot papers, start going out very soon. We know a lot of Conservative Party members vote very early on, and while they have the chance, in the sort of strange system we've got here, to change their mind after they voted, if they vote online, I think that there'll be very few people who end up doing so.
So if you were advising the Rishi Sunak campaign, this U-turn on VAT on fuel, something that he supported, having VAT on fuel as recently as a couple of months ago in the House of Commons, now saying he would cut VAT on fuel were bills to rise further. Would you say that that's a mistake, given that this crucial issue of trust is so important in this contest? Would he have been better to say, actually, I'm sticking in favour of these higher taxes, of this fiscal consolidation, because that's at least consistent?
Yeah, it's ultimately what you just said there. It's not what I would have done. He had a dividing line with Liz Truss, and it wasn't a particularly bad dividing line for him. Sure, Conservative Party members would want tax cuts. Everybody would want tax cuts. But they also appreciated the sort of fiscally sound, don't spend too much money argument that he was previously putting forward. He's kind of lost that dividing line which sort of worked for him. Plus he's got the downside of having U-turned, and, that sort of builds into this he's not trustworthy argument. I do think it's certainly not what I would have done if I was in his position.
Well, really interesting there. Of course, there is still quite a way to run in this contest, and we'll keep a very close eye on those future debates and indeed the 12 hustings that are taking place all around the country. Lucky us, much more reiteration of all of these points to come over August. But for now, Chris Curtis, thank you so much for joining us here live from Westminster. Now, moving on to another issue. On Monday, a damning report was issued by the Health and Social Care Committee. It said that there's a shortage of 12,000 hospital doctors and more than 50,000 nurses and midwives, and that the government has, quote, no credible plan for making the situation any better. The report said the government has shown a marked reluctance to act decisively. And, of course, in last night's curtailed debate, the issue cropped up again, with an audience member saying he felt let down over cancer care. Well, let's talk more about the state of the NHS now with Stephen Dorrell, the former Secretary of State for Health and the former chair of the Commons Health Committee as well. Stephen, thank you so much for making the time this morning. I suppose it was a pretty damning report from the Health and Social Care Committee, but also listening to the words of Jeremy Hunt earlier this week, he was saying there's nothing much that can be done in short order to turn this staffing crisis around.
Well, I agree with Jeremy Hunt, actually, that there's not a huge amount can be done in short order, partly because when we think about the staffing issues in the health service, we have to remember that this isn't simply a problem that we have in the UK and in the National Health Service. There is a global shortage of doctors and nurses. And just looking abroad, as we've often done in the past within the health service, that is, it can work. It can certainly help. I'm not saying it's wrong, but there are no quick and easy fixes, which is why actually what the health service needs to be focusing on, as well as training and bringing people back into practice, is also critically ensuring that we look for efficiencies in the way the service is organised so that the staff that we do have can be properly looked after, properly paid, properly motivated and properly supported.
Yes, it's interesting you there mentioning the international comparisons. I was having a look at how well funded the NHS is this morning. Here's a graph from the OECD, that group of 38 relatively advanced market economies. I believe we can see this on our screens coming up now, or at least very shortly. My gremlins in my ear are scrambling. But it shows that in 2019, 10.2% of GDP was spent on health in the UK. Now, that's obviously grown since then. But at the time, even in 2019, that was ahead of the OECD average. It was ahead of countries like Denmark, Portugal, Australia, Finland, New Zealand, Italy, Spain, Korea, and it was equal to the Netherlands. Why do we feel that performance in the NHS might be behind these countries, despite spending more than them?
Well, I think if you look at those figures for international comparisons, you quoted some where we're marginally ahead. There are others where we're marginally behind. It's often said by people looking at the health service that we spend a smaller proportion of our national income on health than France or Germany or other European comparators. Actually, the graph has now appeared, so we can all see that actually the UK is pretty much bang in the middle. So I think in terms of spending, that argument I don't believe can be used to justify bad outcomes or suboptimal outcomes in the health service, which is why in my first answer to you, I stressed the importance of looking at how we can use the resources better. And I think there are some things we can go on to talk about around integrated care, around the delivery, the better use of digital, and just organising our health service better to deliver good outcomes for people, rather than, as we too often do, we've often said we should focus on better outcomes, prevention, supporting people in the community. What we actually do is divert resources too often into the acute sector and away from some of the more effective community uses.
That's a really interesting point there in terms of how those resources are diverted. But I wonder if there's a further point here. Talking to doctors and nurses, we often hear about how many forms they need to fill in, the sheer bureaucracy of running the system. I read a very interesting piece not so long ago that it said, actually, far from the idea that there are too many middle managers in the NHS, currently there may be not enough middle managers in the NHS, the backroom non-frontline staff who would ordinarily do all of the boring bureaucracy, they have been gutted in favour of producing more frontline staff, and that's actually taken time away from those frontline staff to do the job that they need to do. Do you see any logic in that?
I do see some logic that it's an easy populist argument to say what we need is more doctors, more nurses and fewer administrators. Everybody can say that and you get raised an easy cheer. If the result of doing that, as you rightly say, if the result of doing that is that doctors and nurses spend their time doing administration, I don't think we've got anywhere further forward. The other question that I think is worth pausing on is you use the phrase form filling and pushing paper and so forth. In most other industries, we've moved a lot further in terms of using technology to make form filling redundant, or at least to reduce the number of times you have to answer the same question. One of the things that is very often said, I think rightly, about the health service is that patients go to interviews where they're asked the same questions time and time again. And if the health service were better at listening to the answers that it was given and then passing that information around the system so that the patient, first of all, wasn't answering the same questions multiple times, which is a pretty depressing thing to have to do. But actually, they come in and see a clinician, they have a sense that the clinician knows who they are when they arrive. There's no excuse these days for each interview being separate. They ought to be joined up.
No, that's a really, really interesting point. No doubt there's much more that the government can do here. But for now, Stephen Dorrell, thank you so much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really interesting stuff there, stuff that really affects people's lives. But back to that leadership contest now, and indeed the cost of living. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, backing Liz Truss, of course, this morning hit out against Rishi Sunak's new VAT cut policy. This is what he had to say on Breakfast.
What is fairy tale economics is saying that a VAT cut on energy bills would disproportionately help rich families only 4 months ago, and now saying it's a really good idea now. And the reason he's doing that is because he's under pressure. He knows that his tax-raising agenda isn't working. To me, it seems strange that anybody could aspire to the Tory leadership, essentially advocating tax rises, but that's up to him. But I think he suddenly realised that he's on very dodgy ground there and is now flipping back to saying that VAT should be abolished or reduced on energy bills. That's the fairy tale.
Well, a strong charge there from the Business Secretary. Let's now talk to the former Environment Secretary, Theresa Villiers. She's backing the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, of course. Theresa Villiers, thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. I suppose, first of all, that charge from the Business Secretary that it's Rishi Sunak now engaging in fairy tale economics. What do you say to that?
He's always been clear that he wants to reduce taxes in an affordable and sustainable way. And the change that's happened now is that we now know that it's likely that the energy cap could see bills rise, by £3,000 to £3,000. And in those circumstances, Rishi has advocated further action on tax and on VAT on domestic energy bills. That's in line with the package that he's already overseen as Chancellor to help people with domestic energy bills. But now we know that the prices are being driven up still further. It's right to intervene further with a tax cut, but it is a sustainable one, it is an affordable one, and it won't stoke inflation. So it's very different to some of the tax cuts being advocated by his opponent.
I wonder if the argument is it won't stoke inflation. Why wasn't this something that was brought up earlier in the campaign? Because, of course, Rishi Sunak's whole shtick throughout the last few weeks has been he doesn't want to cut taxes. He doesn't want to abandon the fiscal consolidation that is going on right now in the Treasury until inflation has been brought under control. But now it seems that the opposite is the truth, that energy price inflation is going up, and therefore now's the time for a tax cut.
That's not a correct characterisation of what Rishi's been saying. He said he wants to see taxes come down. He's just insistent that that can only be done in a way which doesn't stoke inflation or add excessively to borrowing. And he is stepping in light of the increase in energy bills, which is now expected in October, to give people further help. It's consistent with the approach he's taken in government with a £37 billion package to help people with rising household bills. It is simply not the same as billions of pounds worth of unfunded tax cuts, which I believe from its opponent might lead to additional problems with inflation and interest rates.
Turning now to some other issues in the campaign. Liz Truss put out a statement about crime, about using police time better and not focusing any longer on these non-crime hate incidents, policing streets rather than tweets. What's Rishi Sunak's idea on crime? He put out a statement last night responding to that claim from Liz Truss.
Well, he's got a very strong focus on delivering the additional police officers, the 20,000 additional police officers, which his management of our economy and our public finances makes possible. And also, he certainly believes that those police officers should be focused on, deterring crime and certainly not policing non-criminal incidents on the internet. I think, to be honest, there is some common ground between the candidates on this, as you would expect, since they're both striving to be leader of the same party.
Yes, I think that sometimes in this conversation we can focus so much on the differences on tax that we forget that actually on the other issues there is a lot of common ground. Teresa Villiers, thank you so much for making time for us this morning. We really appreciate it. Always a joy to have you on the show. Now, finally today, we're going to move on from that leadership debate and talk about how taxpayers' money is spent. This week, the author Douglas Murray posted a photograph on Twitter. It was of a bus stop-style poster. The words on the poster said, "Hey, straight white men, pass the power," in big, bold, black text. Reportedly, a number of these posters have cropped up across the capital, yet the trust behind these posters has received over £3 million in taxpayers' money since 2018. Let's turn now to Elliot Keck, Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, a lot of people will be pretty surprised that the organisation putting up these posters has received so much money from the taxpayer. How's this come about?
It is extraordinary, as you say. So the Arts Council have what's called a range of national portfolio organisations, which are organisations which over a set period of time receive regular funding in order to support their activities. And I think it speaks to a problem in the culture of government, according to which only the state can provide art, culture, museums, sport, whatever it is. And if the state stepped back and said, actually, let's leave the British public to decide what they consider to be art and culture, they're just not going to be able to do it. And I think it's completely misplaced. I was at the theatre last Friday to see a Chekhov play, and it was absolutely packed because the British people understand what culture and art is, and they will pay for it if they have the money.
It's remarkable, looking at our history of art, of culture, of plays, of paintings, of music. You'd be surprised to find that the government didn't fund all of this stuff before the 20th century. Why is it that we've sort of got into this mindset that the only way we can deliver art is by expropriating funds from the taxpayer?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's about this culture of government, really. It's just the ever increasing mission creep of the state that's determined to do more and more and more with more and more and more of taxpayers' money. And it is completely crazy. You mentioned how culture prior to the point when the state started funding this. There's actually studies that suggest that there were more statues and installations in the 1990s and noughties than in the previous century. So I think, yeah, this speaks to this broader problem that the state is trying to do more and more things.
I wonder, on the case of this specific poster, what should the government's response here be? Because, of course, we don't know if the taxpayers' funding directly went to this particular poster, but the organisation behind it certainly received a lot. What should the policy response now be?
Well, our policy response is very simple. The Arts Council should be defunded, so it costs, we think, about £400 to £500 million a year, and that's money that could be put back into taxpayers' pockets. And taxpayers will use that money. They use the money that they see in their pay packets in order to consume culture, go to museums, go to art galleries, go to shows, whatever it is. So our policy is very clear. We need to fund the Arts Council. There may be a case for some grants to strictly local arts groups that maybe could go through councils. There are ways that there are perhaps some taxpayer funds could go to the arts, but generally our policy is very clear to scrap the Arts Council.
Yeah, especially such large amounts to large organisations. It does seem like it is a little bit overbearing. Elliot Keck, thank you so much for bringing us that story there. Really interesting to get the other news outside of course, the leadership debate and the cost of living crisis. Well, that's it for me today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Nana and Mercy. But first, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A fresh start to the day for many of us, but a sunnier start, I think, compared with the last couple of days. Still, though, the cloud will build and there will be a few showers by the end of the day in many spots. High pressure's moving in, so that's keeping things mostly settled, but not entirely sunny or entirely dry because, well, the air is still relatively unstable at the moment, and so the air is rising. It's going to produce some cloud through the morning and early part of the afternoon. So after that bright start, actually the cloud tending to build up and fill in, and a few showers developing, particularly through central southern England, the Midlands, northern England, and further showers to come for northern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. Away from any showers, actually, there will be some bright spells and it will feel warm with light winds, 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18, 19, perhaps 20 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England. Into the evening, and the cloud tends to thicken further across central parts of the country, and further showers will develop. North Midlands into northern England as well as North Wales. They'll move north, and then either side of that, some clear spells. But actually, for many, it's a cloudier night, and as a result, it is a slightly milder night. Temperatures 15 to 16 Celsius in the south first thing, 12 to 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We start off with the early cloud across northern England and North Wales, drifting into southern Scotland, and then further showers will develop across central Scotland, particularly over the Grampians, for example. Also, by the end of the afternoon, some showers start to emerge for West Wales and the southwest. But for many, it's a bright day away from the showers, even a sunny day in the southeast. And the southeast sees predominantly sunny conditions through Friday and Saturday, increasingly warm as well, whilst the rest of the country sees cloud and some showers.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.